I need to make sure I have. Okay. So we need to talk about what Madison does with the embargo. So just remember, there was an incident. Okay, do y'all remember the name of the incident? That in the same year, we don't want to go to war because of the incident. And Thomas Jefferson will agree with Congress and pass the Embargo Act. There was something that happened, an actual like proper noun incident. We don't want to go to war. It's an example of impressment. Do y'all know? Yes. The Chesapeake Leopard affair happened in 1807. And this is a prime example of impressment. The British, there were some deserters. The Americans were killed. We don't want to go to war. We want to be neutral. And the extreme neutrality would be the Embargo Act of 1807. Got it? Okay. Now, make sure for this box for Embargo Act, you know the year, 1807, and what it did. You know what? If you want to shorten it, just put ban trade, period, right? It banned, like, no ship could leave a U.S. port, and no ship could come to a U.S. port. Okay? So basically, our imports and exports are gone. And it was a way of us being neutral because, again, France and England were both violating our freedom of the seas through blockades, and the French were seizing our ships, and the British were impressing our ships and people. Okay, and because of that, we have beef with France and England. Okay, but you will see there's other things that will lead to more problems with England over France. Okay, so again, just no trade. Okay, the last few days in Jefferson's presidency, he will get Congress to repeal the Embargo Act. Okay, and the reason I made these notes kind of like this, so you can see it's like a watered down version of the next one. Okay, or like the previous one. So think about it. If you're Congress and it's 1809, you're going to come up with the Non-Intercourse Act. If you needed to water down and make the Embargo Act less harsh, what would you say if you had to make up a new law? There you go. Okay, so basically what the Non-Intercourse Act did is trade with everyone but England and France. Because think about it, they're the ones having, the British had the Orders in Council blockade, the French had the Continental System blockade. Both are seizing our ships. Okay, so look, we have a problem with just two countries. So we'll open up trade except with those two countries. I think that's a very realistic approach. And probably what should have been in the first place instead of the Embargo Act. Okay. So then you'll have a Speaker of the House. Macon's Bill number 1 didn't go as planned. So you have Macon's Bill number 2. I do not know why it's not called Macon's Law, because it will become a law. They call it Macon's Bill number 2, but it is a law. Okay. And what this did is the audience, it's targeting England and France. So y'all two are left. We've embargoed y'all. Here's what y'all can do. Okay, between England and France, whoever lifts their policies first, that's who we'll trade with. And thus, who doesn't lift it first, that's who will still embargo. Does that make sense? So it will be repealed in 1809. It'll be like February 1809. Okay, Jimmy. But yeah, so Macon's Bill number 2 is 1810. Okay, and again, it basically said England and France. Whoever lifts their policies of seizing ships in their blockade, that is who we will trade with, and will embargo who does not do it first. Okay. Now, what's going to happen? Napoleon, who's leader of France at this time, he hears about this Macon's Bill number 2, and he instantly says, France, we'll get rid of the continental system, we'll get rid of seizing the American ships, like, sign us up. So that means we're going to embargo who? England. Okay, Napoleon lied. You know how there's some people, maybe even politicians, they tell you what you want, what you want to hear, but then like actually enforcing, executing the ideas. Okay. He said that just so we would trade with them and hurt England, basically. But the reality is he didn't, like, he just said it. It was a false promise. Okay, and when people find out, when the continental system is still around and the English or the French seizing of ships, people will now call Madison the duped president. Like he was duped. He was, taken advantage of, D-U-P-E-D. When we find out that France lied, that Napoleon lied, and like I said, we've already made a decree to keep embargoing England. By the time we found out that Napoleon lied, we'd already declared war. So, another reason for the War of 1812, let's see. Okay, and I just want to clarify a couple things. We've talked about violation of freedom of the seas. We talked about impressment. Okay, the next thing is I call it like a bonus, because usually if we go to war, it's because something was done to us, right? This is an example, a reason to go to war. That's like it's like a bonus reason. Okay, we're mad at England for like giving natives weapons, the whole impressment and like the blockades and all that, okay, and other things. But also, they own Canada. And if we go to war and we win, we can demand Canada. Does that make sense? It's like a bonus, a supplementary, a secondary reason, okay? Now, in 1810, that's a midterm election. You will have some younger people gain seats. It's kind of like a fresh, wave of a younger generation in Congress. Okay, and the guy, letter B, and you will see this guy all the way up till chapter 14. Okay, Henry Clay from Kentucky. Okay, he's a Democratic Republican, and then you have a young guy named John C. Calhoun from South Carolina. He'll be vice president one day. Okay, and it's just this new wave, and they're just very energetic, and they call themselves the Warhawks, and they push for war. Because the Canada part, they said, oh, we can expand upward now. Okay, we have reasons to go to war. This would be a bonus, and like their motto in Congress was "On to Canada," meaning like, let's go get it, and we'll expand. Okay, so now let's go to, you can say Tecumseh or Tecumseh. Okay, and this is what this slide is about. So one reason we go to war with England has to do with natives in the frontier. And remember, out west, we're talking like Indiana. We're not talking about like New Mexico, okay? Remember the Northwest Ordinance, once you have 5,000 people, you can have a governor. Once you have 6,000 people, you could apply to be a state, okay? Well, Indiana is a territory. The governor of this territory, and this is a blank right here, letter B, is William Henry Harrison. He is the governor of the Indiana Territory. So that means they have 5,000 people. They have, enough, but they need, it's actually 60,000 people to apply to be a state. Okay. And people aren't moving there. And he needs Americans to move there so they can apply to be a state. The main problem is that there's a lot of natives living there, and they don't want, I guess, kind of like a Pontiac's rebellion, like, you know what I'm saying, like fights happening. And so a lot of people are there. So he basically says, look, we're going to take matters into our own hands and get rid of this native problem so more Americans will come live here. Okay. And so there's something called the Battle of Tippecanoe. Okay. Which is a river in Indiana. Okay. And there's a group of, there's a Shawnee native called Tecumseh or Tecumseh. And his goal is to get a native confederation. He wanted to unite all these natives in this like area, okay, to fight against the Americans, okay. He is actually away when this battle happens, okay. Where is he? He's going to recruit natives to join this anti-American like military, if you will, okay. And at the Battle of Tippecanoe, his brother, which for the Shawnee, he's actually called the prophet. Think like a medicine man, a religious figure, okay? His brother is killed at the Battle of Tippecanoe, okay? Now imagine like a Hollywood thing. You have Tecumseh, who's trying to unite natives to fight against the Americans, okay? He goes away to recruit people. And when he comes back, he finds out about this battle that the Americans started, led by William Henry Harrison. And his brother, the prophet, was killed. Because of that, he will actually go and enlist in the British military now. not just received, he actually received guns from the British to have this confederation, which that would make us mad, right? Because the British are giving some guns, not a lot, but some guns to the natives to kill us, basically. Okay? But after he finds out his brother was killed and after the Battle of Tippecanoe, Tecumseh will join the British military. Okay? And if you look, this happened in 1811 before the war started. It happened, war will be declared in 1812, but it's definitely related. Some people say it's like an unofficial battle. Okay? And don't worry about the Thames and the Creek Wars and Horseshoe Bend. We'll get to that in a second. Okay. So now let's go to the back side. And like I said, if I didn't even mention stuff on the outline, don't worry about it. Okay, like there's like a Treaty of Fort Wayne, like we're good. If I mention, you know, Tippecanoe, Tecumseh, William Henry Harrison, that's what's really important. Okay, and Harrison will actually become a National War hero from the Battle of Tippecanoe. When he runs in the election of 1840, his slogan is Tippecanoe and Tyler too, just to be like, hey, remember me? I'm that military leader. I'm probably a good political leader too. Okay, so now Congress is going to vote for war. This was one of the closest votes for war. Okay, it basically was almost like a stalemate in Congress. Madison will actually go to, he hates giving speeches. He will go to Congress and give a speech to convince some people. And up north, that's where the Federalists are, right? The Federalists want to declare war against England. No, that's like their big trading partner if they could trade. Okay, and so the Federalists say no, we don't want. Okay, there's also some quids. Remember that's the group of the true Republicans who call out Jefferson and stuff, saying we need to be true to those democratic Republican principles. They vote no because they said, look, I thought democratic Republicans were about having a smaller military and about promoting peace. Sounds like we're doing the opposite of those two things. Okay, but what's going to happen is 2 states up north, Vermont was one of them, they will be convinced to vote in support of war. So it was like a very slim majority, but a majority is what gets war declared. Okay, opponents of this war who didn't agree with it, again, a lot of Federalists, a lot of people in New England did not agree with this war. They actually nicknamed this war Mr. Madison's War. Okay, and if you skip down where it says Chapter 8 outline continued, it was called Mr. Madison's War by like opponents saying like he really wanted this war. Okay, so now let's recap. Okay, when Madison gives his speech to Congress, hopefully Congress will listen and declare war. He talks about 4 main reasons we should declare war. Okay, number 1, impressment. Okay, that's definitely a violation of our freedom of the seas and the fact that Americans were killed, hijacked. Okay, number 2 will be the whole like natives. Basically, it's like British helping natives in the frontier, like Tecumseh. That's number 2. Okay. Number 3, I would say this, violation of freedom of the seas. Okay. Like that's your Napoleonic Wars, your Orders in Council, your continental system, like your blockades and just the seizing in general. And then number 4, what is the bonus cause? Canada. So you've heard me talk about reasons for this war. We have one more spot. It's so important. We're including it twice. Okay. So now let's see what you can remember. Roman numeral 1, impressment. Okay. And what I would do is if you go down to Roman numeral 4, where it says Leopard and Chesapeake affair, Leopard is the British ship. Okay. I would draw an arrow going back to impressment. So you know that impressment overall is definitely a problem. And like the Chesapeake Leopard affair is an explicit example of that impressment. Okay. Number 3, British supplying natives like Tecumseh on the frontier. Row number 5, U.S. hope to acquire Canada, those Warhawks. Okay, now we still have problems with France. If you look right there, okay, but France is the lesser of the 2 evils. By the time we declare war, okay, remember Napoleon lifted the blockade. That's what we think, right? Okay, and also remember, the French are seizing our ships. The French also have a blockade. The difference is, though, with impressment, the British are actually basically kidnapping the Americans on board and forcing them to the Navy. So it's a little worse. And again, I told you that the opposition to the war will be those New England Federalists and then the Quids. And again, there will be a blockade, but one good thing is we will become more self-sufficient, because if we can't get items from other countries, we have to make it ourselves. Okay. And a quick question. You might have, I know if you took AP Year, you've had these types of questions, but you might not sure what they were called. They're called synthesis questions, which basically means like you're connecting, it's like a Venn diagram. You're finding some type of connection. Okay. So like, you probably have multiple choice questions in the past that said like, this event is similar to what later event? Does that make sense? That's called a synthesis question. Okay. So let's pretend, I know it's been a while since 10th grade, okay? But the War of 1812, a big reason that America declared war on England was the whole violation of freedom of the seas. What is a later war where America declares war on a country because our freedom of the seas were violated? So remember, the British, they're hijacking our ships. Yes, World War I. Y'all know, what's the name of that boat? Lusitania. What? Hey, you know what? Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. I'll give you, there you go. You're still right, okay? You really are right. So there you go. That was good. Okay. That happened in 1915. That's called unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning like there's rules of international waters where you're not allowed to torpedo. It's like no one owns those waters. And the German U-boats still torpedoed the Lusitania, the Sussex, the Arabic. Okay, all those. And you probably didn't hear about those, but it's okay. The Lusitania was the first one. But that's another example. You see that synthesis? So like impressment and us getting involved in the War of 1812 is similar to like Lusitania getting involved like World War I, because they both violate freedom of the seas. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break from notes. We're going to do War of 1812 after this. Okay. I'm going to give you roughly 20 minutes. Okay. And you're going to do, there are 20 questions in AP Classroom, strictly multiple choice. Okay, I would encourage you not to use your notes. Again, I'm not going to punish you. Like if you just like, if it's an off day and you only got 3 right out of 20, if you tried, and I can tell Go Guardian that you took your time and you still like flunked it, that's still like a 100 in my mind. Does that make sense? I would try not to use your notes, but if you need to, you know what I'm saying, because you can't use your notes Friday on your test. Okay, there are just 20 questions. Multiple choice, and it's basically Jefferson all the way up to like declaring war with the War of 1812. Okay, so it's basically almost 10:40. So let's say at 11. So now let's go over some stuff with the actual War of 1812. So you can see from this little slide right here that we were definitely unprepared, okay? We were definitely unprepared for this war. This side right here is, you know, the American side, okay? And this over here is the British side, okay? You can see, look at how many ships they have compared to what we have. It definitely makes sense why they would use a naval blockade, and that will be very effective against us. Okay, so just note, we were very unprepared. Another thing too is the Bank of the United States. Remember Hamilton's thing? We got a 20-year charter. It expires in 1811, the Bank of the United States. And sometimes, like when you're in a war, you need to have like as centralized and organized as possible to make things efficient. Like a big reason why the Union won the American Civil War is because they had a centralized government that had been established. It's not on the notes, Demi. It's just a little tidbit. Okay. I'll tell you when we get to the notes. Sorry about that. But you can just see that like we need that centralization, and we don't have it at this time. So you'll see like after the War of 1812, it's like maybe we need to revisit and do a second Bank of the United States. Okay. Okay, just note 1812, James Madison wins again. Look at all that like purplish gray. Definitely wins by a lot. Okay, so now let's talk about the actual War of 1812. Okay, this depicts there's a couple of different theaters or regions for fighting. At first, we're going to go to Canada, on to Canada. Now it's going to be a pretty big failure. Okay, they'll work their way up. Then they're like, okay, scratch that. They're going to work their way down. Hence, the Great Lake Theater, the Great Lakes, like Lake Erie. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, I want to point out, you see where it says like Northeast Coast? Just want to point out, don't think like New England or don't think like up north, like way up north. Think like the Chesapeake Bay. Remember, like, so if you look at this right here, where like Washington, D.C. is and all that, do y'all see this British blockade? Okay. There is an effective British blockade from this map. And from that, they will enter through the Chesapeake Bay, the James River, and get to Washington, D.C., the British will. Okay. So that's like the Chesapeake Northeast coast. And then you have what we call like the South and the West. Okay. So you'll have, basically you'll have like some fighting in Alabama. And you'll have some fighting in Louisiana with the Battle of New Orleans. Okay. So I told you we first will go up to the Great Lakes, or sorry, to Canada. Okay. Canada, huge failure. Okay. So we basically lose at Detroit, which is like Detroit, Michigan today. That was part of Canada at this time. We lose Detroit. We lose at Niagara Falls. Okay. We lose Montreal. So it's like bam, 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 defeated. Okay. We did gain control of Lake Ontario. Okay. We got one thing. Okay. We will burn York, which was Canada's capital. Okay. But like, we won't be able to keep the control of Ontario. So we realized like it's such a powerhouse of the English in Canada that we can't hold on to it long and we'll retreat. And that's where we go to the Great Lakes. Okay. So there's one big thing at Lake Erie. There's a battle and we win. Okay. And there is a guy named Oliver Hazard Perry. Okay. And he was a very good leader, got enough ships built and together to fight at this naval battle. Okay. So this is a naval battle. Okay. And we will be successful here. That gives us a lot of momentum. Okay. William Henry Harrison, remember, he was in Indiana. Now he's in the military. We go back to Detroit and we win. Okay. Then there's something called the Battle of the Thames. I know it looks like it's Thames, right? But the Thames River is the river that flows through London. And then, like, again, we were European and we're not that creative. So one river up north will be the Thames River. Okay. And we are successful there as well. So I would say the Great Lakes, we're pretty good there. Okay. Interesting is that at the Battle of the Thames, Tecumseh is killed. He actually enlisted in the British military and he will die. And so that will like another morale booster for us because like the natives up north, well, the leader, like he's out. Okay. So Great Lakes are good with us, but then Napoleon's demise. So y'all know all about that from world history. Okay, so Napoleon loses, okay, and all that stuff that happens to him, okay. Now it's going to be focusing on, that's bad for us because now that means that England can shift their focus and focus on America. More ships will blockade, and then because of that, that is when more soldiers and stuff will arrive in this area and then enter Washington, D.C. Okay, and so remember I told you about the British blockade. There is another naval battle that has to do with the USS Constitution. Okay, not the U.S. Constitution, the USS Constitution, a ship. Its nickname was Old Ironside, so it's a battleship with iron on it, so maybe like to help protect bullets, cannonballs, all that kind of stuff. And it won like at least 42 battles. It tried to break through this blockade, and it was so close. After like hours and hours of fighting, it will retreat. Okay, it did not sink. Okay, the USS Constitution, you actually can, I guess, sail on it if that's the verb. It's in Boston Harbor today. And it is the oldest battleship that is still in commission, meaning like used. Just to clarify, like once a year there's a celebration and they like sell it out for like 10 minutes and then it comes back. So like it's still in commission, okay? But it's one of those, like, again, a lot of this is about morale boosting, and you'll see that this war really leads to us believing in our country and not being like, oh, Europe, you know, it used to be Europe. Now it's like, no, we're American. That nationalism is going to grow, okay? So when you hear about the, you know, this old Ironsides, the Uss Constitution not sinking and, you know, all that gives you, you know, a little belief in your country. Okay, so now we have that northeast coast, and remember the British, after, you know, Napoleon's demise, more British will come to this area. They will enter through the Chesapeake Bay, think like Jamestown area, and then, you know, that's Virginia. They will make it their way to Washington, D.C. Okay, they burn down the Capitol building. They burn down the Executive Mansion. That's actually what you called the White House back then. You don't call it the White House until the early 1900s. Okay, and you might have heard of that famous story of what historians call America's first real first lady, Dolly Madison. James Madison's actually like out of the Executive Mansion, the White House. He's with troops. Okay, and the house, you know, the White House or Executive Mansion is burning, and she asked servants to take the Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington off, and it's a very big portrait, okay? Because it's the idea that if this Executive Mansion, this White House, burns down to the ground, if there's one thing worth saving, it is the portrait of George Washington, so people know what he looked like and his contributions, you know, to our country, okay? So that just shows you how people view, you know, George Washington. Okay, so things are really bad. So again, Washington, D.C. is burned down, including the Executive Mansion. So the White House that is there today is not the White House that was then. It was completely burned down. Okay, one thing though, so now once D.C. is basically taken by the British moved to Baltimore, Maryland. And outside of Baltimore is Fort McHenry. Okay, and that is where we get, so after hours and hours of the British bombarding with cannons, Fort McHenry outside of Baltimore, Maryland, they basically stopped. The British tried to take over Fort McHenry, and they couldn't, okay? There is an onlooker, Francis Scott Key, who is so moved by what he saw, that America endurance, he will write a poem, okay, called The Defense of Fort McHenry. In 1931, the text to the poem will be put to music with another pre-existing song, and it will become our official national anthem. Okay, that's another example of this like nationalism of like America endurance. We are no longer, we used to be English. We are our own, that identity. Okay. Also to point out Andrew Jackson, he's that Indian fighter. You have the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, and that's going to be in Alabama. And the main natives there are Creeks, the Creek Native Americans, and he basically just annihilates them. Okay, so what's good about that, first of all, he's an Indian fighter, so you see he doesn't really like Indians or natives when he's president. He fought them during this time, but also like he just basically wiped out a group that was loyal to the English, an ally. Okay, now I'm skipping about New Orleans. It'll make sense later. Go to the backside. The Treaty of Ghent, G-H-E-N-T, Ghent is in Belgium, and John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and Albert Gallatin, okay, will go to Belgium and negotiate a treaty. All the treaty did was establish a stalemate or like an armistice, okay? The status quo was still the same. So there wasn't much change at all between the things, okay? It's the idea that, you know, we were okay with Great Lakes, but we weren't really successful in Canada. Our nation's capital basically was destroyed. It's that thing where it's like, okay, we've gotten lucky that we haven't lost and had to surrender, but we definitely are like struggling. And if we just go ahead and like agree to this like truce, like we didn't lose. You know, if we continue and take a risk, we probably would lose. Does that make sense? So, Demi, in D.C., it was really bad. In Baltimore, the British were not successful in taking over Fort McHenry. So America was successful defending Fort McHenry, and that's in Baltimore. Okay. So the Treaty of Ghent, what's great for y'all is there's not all these terms like how it was the Treaty of Paris and the Treaty of 1763. All you need to know is it just ended the war. There was no winner. There was nothing new established, no change. It just was an agreement to stop fighting. And when the Senate gets this treaty, they will quickly ratify it because it's like, oh, you want to end fighting? Okay, let's ratify it. Okay. It didn't mention anything of impressment. It didn't even mention anything about borders or anything. It basically just said, like, agree to stop fighting. Okay. So now let's go to the front side again, where we have Battle of New Orleans. This is one of those like awkward things, and like maybe if we had better communicative like technology, this battle might not have happened. Okay, so technically the treaty, the war ended by the time it was ratified and stuff, December 24th, so Christmas night, 1814, almost 1815. Okay, the Battle of New Orleans happened 2 weeks later in 1815. Okay. The telegraph will not be invented for another 15 years. So the only reason they know about this would be like through letters and, you know, snail mail. It takes a lot longer than what we have today. Okay. And so in New Orleans, you have General Andrew Jackson. Okay. And he leads a motley crew of people. This is New Orleans. So there's Creoles, there's Cajuns, there's mulattoes. Supposedly there's even like some pirates. And it's like, he was able to relate to all these different types of people and like annihilate the British with a like very small casualties on our side. Lots and lots of more casualties than Bunker Hill. Okay. So what's interesting is, so there were like, I think 43 casualties on the American side, meaning like injuries and deaths. But of the 43, only 8 were actually killed. Okay. There were over 1,500 British casualties. Okay, do you see this like a big, like an America moment where this motley crew just annihilates the British? And then you find out later this battle wasn't even necessary. The war had already been over. So that really makes you feel like even more of like that American identity. It's like we annihilated them and we didn't even have to. You see that? Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of, okay, we already talked about this, but remember, Canada, not great for America. Then they go to the Great Lakes, which is pretty good for America, okay? Then you have Napoleon's demise, so more British will focus on the Atlantic theater, where you have that British naval blockade. You will have the Chesapeake campaign, where the British will infiltrate our nation's capital, burn it down. They go to the Battle of Baltimore and try to take over Fort McHenry. They are not successful. Francis Scott Key is moved by what he witnesses and writes the defense of Fort McHenry, which becomes our national anthem eventually. And I'll show you all that in just a second. Okay, so here is Old Ironsides, the U.S. Constitution. Okay, it was constructed basically like Washington/Adams presidency. Okay, and it technically still in commission. It had 42 wins. Okay, it never was like sank, so that's kind of a cool thing. The end of the War of 1812. Okay, you have that Treaty of Ghent. Okay, and remember, the Senate quickly ratified it because it's a quick, oh, let's stop fighting. We probably would have lost if we continued, okay? And there was nothing new established. All about continuity there, okay? The Battle of New Orleans happened 2 weeks later, and it was unnecessary. We just didn't know it at the time. And look at that, 1,500 casualties compared to 43 American casualties, okay? This painting depicts the Battle of New Orleans. You can see General Jackson there. Just like William Henry Harrison, being a good military leader, the Battle of Tippecanoe and the Battle of Detroit, okay? And the Battle of New Orleans really puts Andrew Jackson on the spot as a national war hero. And 13 years later, the presidency, okay? Okay, so the War of 1812's impact. So why does this matter, okay? Somewhere here, just somewhere on your page, it's just write like nationalism in all caps. That really is like the most important thing about the impact of this war. Because think about it. Just write nationalism somewhere near Treaty of Ghent. Okay. Technically, we're not back-to-back losers, right? We fought England. We won Treaty of Paris 1783. We fought England again, and we didn't lose. Okay? So we kind of had that sense. It's almost like Big Brother was like watching us in this war, and they finally like did something about it, and we didn't lose. No, we didn't win, but we didn't lose. Okay, so we feel like we have that pride, and other countries in Europe will actually respect us a little bit more because, again, England fought us twice, and we didn't lose twice. So it's like we believe in our country more. Okay, and there will be a time where we're not really going to focus on wars during this time after the War of 1812. We're going to focus on building up our domestic stuff, making America just like awesome, expanding, having another bank, having roads, canals. There will be one political party during this time. I'll get to that tomorrow. Okay, but do you see how we take pride in our country? A lot of times before the War of 1812, people still like, yes, they look at their English history. They won't probably take an English class because they still, being identified being somewhat English heritage, right? But after the War of 1812, it's like, no, like we are American, okay? For instance, things like Uncle Sam, that fictional character created during the War of 1812. We also get the defense of Fort McHenry, which will be our national anthem one day. We also get the War of 1812 overture, which is a pride thing as well. Also remember, because of that blockade by the English during the war, we cannot buy stuff, so we had to make our own stuff. Our industry and economy will boom after the War of 1812. Because think about it, now we're not in a war and we've got our factories ready because of the blockade. Okay, and here's something too, this identity here. This is called the 4th of July celebration. We actually, around this time, start to celebrate being American, and not like mourning not being English, but being American. And it's just, you can just see it's all about this American identity and celebrating our history, but not like being English. It's our history. Got it? Okay. So I have a couple things to show you, and then we'll be finished. So I have a feeling we'll finish a little early, but I have a couple of videos. And if you see right here, this next one, don't forget, quiz tomorrow, Thomas Jefferson and Madison, so basically War of 1812. And here's the quizzes link. And just remember, if it's all of chapter 8. If there's a question that ends with part 2 in all caps, it means it's not on the quiz, but it could be on Friday's test. So don't freak out. You're like, oh, Air of Good Feelings, Hartford Convention, but it'll say part 2, so you know. Part 1 is the quiz stuff. Okay. Demi, we're going to get to the convention tomorrow. Okay, so let's watch some of these. The first is just a quick overview of the War of 1812.
So I saw in your profile that you like to cook.
Oh, I love it. This is my specialty.
Ooh, thanks.
Oh, you ate it already.
I was really hungry.
Want some more?
No, thank you.
It's often been mislabeled as the Second War for American Independence. The War of 1812, which was fought between the years 1812 and 1815 between the belligerent countries of the United States of America and Great Britain, was a war that was controversial in its time and largely forgotten to this day. It began on 2 frontiers. The first frontier was the American frontier, west of the Appalachian Mountains. British outposts were allegedly supporting native tribes, giving them food, guns, ammunition to fight the American settlers who were moving westward. On the second frontier, the Atlantic Ocean, American shipping was at risk. The British government was forcing American merchantmen to sail into British ports to be taxed on all of their goods, even if they weren't doing trade with the British Empire. At this time, there was a war raging on the European continent. It was between a coalition of nations and Napoleon Bonaparte's France. Great Britain had been embroiled in this war since the 1790s. and it had been a long and costly affair for all nations involved. Across the Atlantic, it impacted the United States, as the great ally of the United States was France. If it were not for France, we would not be a free and independent nation from Great Britain. But with the beheading of Louis XVI and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, this great alliance was on shaky legs. Still, the Americans were trading with the French, and this did not sit well with the British. This was too much for some in the United States, mainly Warhawks like John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay. And in June of 1812, for the first time in its history, the United States will declare war on a foreign nation. The United States military forces, the Navy, the Army, they were ill prepared to go to war with the world's greatest empire. By late 1812, excursions into Canada, where Americans were trying to break Canada away from the tyranny, as they saw it, of Great Britain. Americans will push into Canada with mixed results. The war will expand out onto the oceans. Earning its nickname, Old Ironsides, the Uss Constitution will score its first victory during the War of 1812. Other American frigates will also bring home prizes and victories, much needed to keep the war going at home. But back across the Atlantic, things are starting to change during the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon has come to grief in Russia. This will give a free hand to Great Britain to start paying attention to the pesky Americans back across the Atlantic. Thus, 30,000 British soldiers will be landed in Canada. Warships will end up off of American waters. The British will then, in 1814, land a force south of Washington, D.C., and capture and burn the United States Capitol. At the Battle of Baltimore, they will be turned back at Fort Mchenry and will be given our Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key. The British will then turn to the deep south, along the Gulf Coast, where they will fight at places like Pensacola, Mobile, and eventually at New Orleans, where an up-and-coming general named Andrew Jackson will bring home a victory in January of 1815, which 13 years later will propel him to the White House. Shortly after New Orleans, the Treaty of Ghent, which will end the War of 1812, is signed. Both sides will essentially go back to status quo antebellum. The British will hold on to Canada, the Americans will have their land holdings, and some improved fishing rights. Although much of the war was poorly prosecuted on the American side, there were enough victories to instill a sense of patriotism and pride. Perhaps the longest lasting legacy to come from the War of 1812 is our Star-Spangled Banner. While most Americans can't name a single battle from the War of 1812, they do know the words to our national anthem.
I hope that was a good overview of the war. Okay, now national anthem. Okay, I want to show you this clip.
Powerful siege artillery afloat.
The last thing, I just wanted to show you some history. So again, I told you that the poem that Francis Scott Key wrote is called The Defense of Fort McHenry. Okay, and what's going to happen is just a poem. Around the same time, there was this drinking song. Okay, so there were people. There was this society that was like a drinking club. They'd go and like drink and tavern stuff and clink their mugs and all that. Okay, what it was is in 1931, they will take the text from the poem and use it with the melody of this pre-existing song. And President Hoover, during the Great Depression, will make this our national anthem. So I'm going to play just a couple of seconds of this, but you can see, even though it's different words, it's the same melody.
Where he sat in full glee, a few songs of harmony sent a petition that he their inspired and patron would be. When this answer arrived from the jolly old Grecian. For
So, you know, I don't realize that. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. We are finished for the day. So you have a little bit, you know, around-ish 10 minutes. So y'all may go ahead and log off. Don't forget to complete that AP Classroom. And there is that quiz that you can do if you want to do that for studying. You don't have